Hi, I'm James from Chaosium. If you've been watching these interviews for a while, you will have already met a lot of the Chaosium team, but there are a heap of cool people that you haven't met yet, and we want you to. So to that end, I sat down with Nick Nacario. Nick is the production coordinator for Chaosium. He is responsible for putting together basically all of our books, and he has also been with the company for a very, very long time and has worn a lot of hats over his years at Chaosium. I'll jump across to my interview with him in just a moment, but first, please subscribe to our channel, and thanks for watching.
Hi, I'm Nick Nacario. I am the production coordinator for Chaosium Inc. I schedule people's time for cartography, layout, art direction, and other production-related tasks. I've been working for the company for about 14 years now. It'll be 15 next June. I've worn many different hats for Chaosium. I've art directed. I have done layout. I've even done invoicing early on in my tenure here at Chaosium.
14 years is a long time, and it's amongst the longest running careers at Chaosium. You've seen many ages of the company.
Yeah. Well, I first started in 2008. A family friend called me at the time, Charlie Crank. He was the president of the company back in 2008. And he called me and he asked me if I wanted a job doing essentially invoicing and packaging and shipping for orders. So I worked in the warehouse for the first couple of years. In 2011, I started doing layout when Charlie Crank asked me if I wanted to either start learning about book production or if I wanted to learn about how the company was ran. And at the time, I decided that book production would be a pretty good skill to learn because if I ever needed to, while possibly learning how to run the company, I could switch over to book production if we needed to do that. So ever since 2011 and since laying out the book House of Real Yay, I've essentially had my hand in every Call of Cthulhu product since then, except for a handful of them.
Do you feel like you've developed over that time a Nick Nacario signature, something that is, indicative of the touch you've had on all of the Chaosium products for such a long time?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I've never thought about that. I don't know if I could point to any certain thing. I've had a lot of help from a lot of other people over the years. I've had a lot of good mentors, had a lot of really good people giving me advice. So I don't know if I could really point to any certain thing. I will say that I like having things in either in like a spot that I think would be like really visually appealing. Like if the text needs to flow properly. So if it ends in the, I don't know, this gets really technical when I'm talking about this, but if it ends in the second column of the first page, it should probably continue on to the like if it ends in the second column immediately at like a half page picture. This is only layout nerds are going to get this, but it should go immediately to probably the top of the left-hand column of the second page, because that's where your eye goes if you're reading a book.
When you're laying out a book, I just want to be a fly in the room, fly on the wall for like a second. What if I spot you in the middle of putting it together? What does it look like? What software are you using? What kind of decisions are going through your head? What are you thinking about when you're really in the flow of it?
Really in the flow of it. I have Bay Area rap music blasting really loud. I am copying and pasting and just playing with it as much as I can, and then eventually coming to a decision. That's how it should look. This looks visually appealing to me. I think this is what I would want if I bought a book. This is how I would want it to look. That's usually how I approach it. At one point, I was buying role-playing games, and now I make them. So what would I, as a consumer, want to look at, and what would I want to see in a book? And what would be visually appealing to me? And also what would give me the best informational, like best flow of information, I guess, would be the way to put it.
Do you think that your skills and your process in terms of organizing, layout timings and deciding where resources get allocated have been improved because you've been on the other side of that wall? You've actually worked in layout and you've done all of the stuff that you're assigning and deciding?
Definitely. I feel like it's a good thing that once you move to a managerial role, you have to know all of the jobs beforehand. That way you're not, aggressively asking your employees that you work with, why isn't this done right now? Why isn't this, why aren't you working on this? And it's like, it takes time. Everything takes a lot of time on the production schedule or production side of things. And I feel like people that don't understand that will sometimes give unrealistic deadlines. And so being on a leadership role, I think that people that you work with, it's best to protect their workflow and just themselves as people.
Some people might look at a games company and they think that a lot of the work is just creative. Can you shatter that illusion? Can you talk about how critical production is?
Well, production, it is a creative job, but it's also a very by the book job. We have to follow standards and we have to follow procedures and stuff like that. Like if once you open a Chaosium book or a Call of Cthulhu book specifically, or a RuneQuest book or a 7th Sea book, any of our books, you have to know it's a Call of Cthulhu book. At a convention recently, a friend asked, why don't you guys, make variants on your layout styles, like maybe, one for Down Darker Trails specifically, one for another setting, like maybe Gaslight. And that would be, it would be worth making a limited edition that's a little more fancier. But having the consistency there, whenever someone opens a Call of Cthulhu book, they know it's a Call of Cthulhu book. You will see, the same design, you'll see the same style. And at one point in Chaosium's history, I would say that it was kind of hard to notice that. You kind of had to see the Chaosium logo to tell it was a Chaosium book. So that's a really welcome change, I would say, that's happened in the last couple of years.
Do you think that there is one element of laying out a book, putting it together and getting it out to people that is kind of hidden from the public perception, something that is really hard and, takes a lot of effort or creativity to get right, but that doesn't really get seen?
Trying to figure out where how a page should look, how a page spread should look. It'll sometimes take a couple of hours just to figure out how the 2 pages that you're looking at should appear. Because once it's published, it's done. Like you don't have a chance to actually go back and change it. You can make different editions, but people will notice that and people will point it out, and forums aren't online and stuff like that. So you want to try to get it right the first time. And I'm kind of a philosophy that a rushed book or a rushed game will always be bad, but a game that takes some time to come out and is good once it comes out, it will always be good.
You've worked, as you mentioned, for almost 15 years, laying out books, putting everything together, doing a huge amount of work, and that's kind of encompassed this large TTRPG renaissance. Not that there wasn't more happening, and you've just had this long arm of a career, basically. Can you give us some insight on changes that you might have noticed specifically, considering that you've had such a long kind of direct eye on things?
Definitely. Well, at one point, a lot of Chaosium books were just black and white, up until about 2015 or 2016, when Moon Design took over Chaosium. They decided that everything needed to be full color, and it was the right move and the way to bring Chaosium into the 21st century, back into the fold as an industry leader. At one point, I would say that we kind of fell by the wayside and weren't seen as much of an industry leader as, say, Wizards of the Coast or Paizo. But nowadays, we are now seen as one of the top role-playing game companies producing products or producing role-playing games.
You mentioned that you've worn a lot of hats. Can you actually talk about just that full scope? Can you give us a list of every job that you've done for Chaosium?
Okay, like I said, I've started with invoicing. I was on QuickBooks just entering orders. I just was essentially doing data entry for the first couple of years. And then at one point, I switched over to also handling the shipping of products. So if at any point between 2009 and 2011, maybe even a couple of years after that, if you ever ordered a book or a product from Chaosium, I might have handled it and sent it. And I apologize if it arrived dinged. Um, after that, like I said, I started moving into layout and art direction because at the time there was a small skeleton crew, about 6 to 8 of us working at the office at the time. So we all had to kind of wear different hats and have multiple roles in the company. At that point, everything kind of fell under production as a job. And so you had to handle art direction and also like minor editing and also layout. So I've done pretty much everything as far as producing a book goes, except writing the whole thing. I've done a little bit of writing, but not enough.
You've done so much. What was the thing that came the least naturally to you, and how did you still manage to do it?
The thing that came least naturally to me, I would say, is was art direction. It's really hard to start learning how to read a manuscript and figuring out which book or which scenes and which people and which monsters need to be depicted. I think that it's an interesting skill to learn. It takes a lot of imagination and a lot of creativity. I think that everyone is capable of learning how to do it, though. It's learning how to do it well is a different thing. I've noticed that not, you know, it's a really hard skill to learn. I've made mistakes at times. I've definitely, you know, I've commissioned the wrong artists for things, or I've, you know, depicted the wrong scene. It happens. It's you know, it's a learning curve.
That's kind of funny because when I started at Chaosium, for some reason, for a long time, I had you and in my head as the art director, so it's funny that that was the one that came most unnaturally to you. On that note, sort of, you talked about a lot of the sort of leadership skills that you've learned, and leadership and, you know, organization is its own creative pursuit. Have you seen any kind of really interesting elements, or can you give any advice to people who might be going into a kind of leadership or managerial role within a company like Chaosium that is very creative arts focused, that is sometimes a little flexible, shall we say?
I would say listen and trust your employees, and listen to those that have done their job for a few years at least, especially if you've hired them for freelance roles or other such, or part-time even, or full-time, but specifically freelance. Those are the people that you need to trust the most. And if you find a freelance artist or a freelance writer, odds are they impressed you at one point. And so you need to trust them to be able to deliver the goods, as some of my friends have said over the years.
Would it be true that you are the longest running Chaosium employee?
I'm the second longest tenured employee. Dustin Wright he has about 12 years on me. He started in 1996. I started in 2008. And there was a brief period in 2015 where I was fired and then rehired as part of the you know, reshuffling. You know, it happens. I understand. Like I wasn't resentful or anything like that. When I was fired, it was a part of a you know, just clean slate. You know, when a buyout happens, you just clean house, and I knew it was happening. I went home and I wrote up my resume, and I came back the exact same day and I said, here's what I do. I'm the person that makes your books. And then I got a call a few days later, and I thought it was the old owner, and I said, hey, Charlie. And then the other person on the line said, it's not Charlie, this is Greg. And I was like, oh. I said, hey, Greg, how are you doing? And he's like, hey, we need somebody to make books for Gen Con. We heard that you were the person that was working on those. So if you'd like to come in on Friday, come on in, and yeah, we'll, you know, for an interview. And it was, you know, it was very laid back, and it was very easy. And I essentially, after like 15 minutes of talking with him, I was back in the saddle making the second edition of Cthulhu Dark Ages that released in summer of 2015.
Pretty damn cool. It just does occur to me that you've had 2 careers with Chaosium, both of which are twice as long as I've been with the company. It's just so cool. Yeah, no, that's great. Okay. Historians of Chaosium will be excited to know that you worked there, back in the day. You worked at Chaosium when it was in the Bay Area. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, it was originally it's Chaosium was originally a Bay Area company. It started, I believe, in Albany, which is a small town that's north of Berkeley, California. It started off in a small house with Greg and his friends, all just producing books. At one point, then it moved to Berkeley, I believe, to another house, then to an army base in Oakland. Yeah, very, very interesting story and very interesting series of rentals, I guess. Then at one point it was at Charlie Crank's house. And then when I was starting there, it was in a small little office space on A Street in Hayward, California, which is actually my hometown. So I would just ride my bike 20 minutes and then I would be at work. It was pretty fun. It was, like I said, there was only a handful of us. There was, at the time when I first started, it was just 2 of the small units of this like office space. And one of the office units, or one of the units was an office, and the other unit was the warehouse. And then it eventually grew as, more products came, and essentially the Horror on the Orient Express Kickstarter required us to have more room. There was a lot of books printed for that.
You talked about working for Chaosium a lot, but it's not the only company you've worked for, right? You've also got some credits, and you've worked on other TTRPG products as well, right?
Yeah, I've done some freelance work for Golden Goblin Press. They're one of Chaosium's licensees, owned by Oscar Rios. He's a good friend. So I've done some layout work for them. I've also done some writing for them for their Call of Cthulhu supplements. I've also written for a couple of fiction companies. I can't remember their names off the top of my head. It's been so long since I've actually written any fiction. But it's something that I need to get back into, and probably for Chaosium as well.
What kind of games do you play?
I personally like playing games where you can just sit down and play. I grew up playing Chaosium games. I started kind of playtesting for Chaosium around 1998. If you have a copy of Dragon Lords of Melniboné, the old D20 Elric supplement, you'll see my name in the playtesting credits. And also, and I believe it's Stormbringer 5th edition. I forget which page, but there's a quote, and then at the end of it, it says the War Dog of Darjor, and it says from the Matron Military Academy, and that was my first role-playing game character. So it was, yeah, that tickled me a lot. That was when I was about 11, I think that book came out.
Over the scope of your career, you must have seen a lot of trends emerge, and I guess trends fade out too. Is there sort of a movement within TTRPGs that you've been able to witness the entire or sort of the dramatic early scope of?
I would say with Call of Cthulhu's 7th edition Renaissance, it went from having a really small, community of really hardcore fans that, would keep it afloat, essentially, would buy enough product to, keep the company going. But, once we started publishing higher end products and stuff like that, along with, Mike Mason's brilliant, handling of the line, Call of Cthulhu has skyrocketed to become the second most popular role-playing game on Roll20. So that's been really interesting to witness and to live through and to be a part of. It's been really an awesome ride.
Do you have a favorite Call of Cthulhu supplement?
My favorite supplement is Tatters of the King, the King in Yellow campaign that came out around, I believe, 2004, 2006. It's the ending for it, I think, is very interesting. It's not typical of a lot of classic Call of Cthulhu campaigns where there's like a large climax. The climax is kind of the King in Yellow comes and you just choose if you go with him or not. And just a very interesting ending. Spoiler alert, I should have said that earlier. But I've ran it for friends, and it was a blast.
You've been with Chaosium for 15 years. What are you hoping happens in the next 15 years?
I'm really excited for the Arkham Country books to come out for Call of Cthulhu. It's been a while since a Arkham book or a Innsmouth book or a Kingsport book has come out. I'm really excited for those. I'm excited for the Land of a Thousand Nations supplement that's coming out for 7th Sea. I've been working on the art direction for that. That's the book that focuses on indigenous cultures of America. So that'll be really interesting to see come to 7th Sea. I'm also really excited for Chaosium to maybe publish its first all Black, Indigenous, and people of color books. Dungeons and Dragons recently published theirs, and I'm hoping that we follow suit.
You came in through, into invoicing, and you have done so much, worn so many different hats. For people who want to work in the TTRPG industry, what advice do you have for them? Because you've gotten into basically every job at some point. How should people approach getting that kind of work?
I would suggest networking. That's the best way to get a job in the tabletop RPG industry. Other than WotC, I don't know of many companies that do open calls for jobs. It really comes down to who you know. So going to conventions, getting your name out there, talking to people on Twitter, or giving out business cards at conventions. That's the best way to maybe get a job in the tabletop industry.